Lady Chatterley's Lover. Yes, the continuing story of Lady Chatterley's Lover, the romance, what's taking place in Connie's life. So I think the last words were, it was morning. Indeed, it was morning. And downstairs, she heard him making the fire, pumping water, going out at the back door. By and by came the smell of bacon, and at length he came upstairs with a huge black tray that would only just go through the door. He set the tray on the bed and poured out the tea. Connie squatted in a torn nightdress and fell on her food hungrily. He sat on the one chair with his plate on his knees. "How good it is," she said. "How nice to have breakfast together." He ate in silence, his mind on the time that was quickly passing, that made her remember. "Oh, how I wish I could stay here with you, and Rugby were 1,000,000 miles away. It's Rugby I'm going away from, really. You know that, don't you?" "Aye. And you promise me we will live together and have a life together, you and me. You promise me, won't you? Don't you?" "Aye, when we can." "Yes. And we will, won't we?" She leaned over, making the tea spill, catching his wrist. "Aye," he said, "tidy up the tea." "We can't possibly not live together now, can we?" she said appealingly. He looked up at her with his flickering grin. "No," he said. "Only you've got to start in 25 minutes. "Have I?" she cried. Suddenly, he held up a warning finger and rose to his feet. Flossie had given a short bark. There, 3 loud, sharp yaps of warning. Silent, he put his plate on the tray and went downstairs. Constance heard him go down the garden path. A bicycle bell tinkled outside there. "Morning, Mr. Mellors. Registered letter." "Oh, I got a pencil. Here you are." There was a pause. "Canada," said a stranger's voice. "Aye, that's a mate of mine out there in British Columbia. Dunno what he's got to register. Happened to send you a fortune, like. Was like wonder something." Pause. "Well, lovely day again. Aye, morning." After a time he came upstairs looking a little angry. "Postman," he said. "Very early," she replied. "Rural round. He's most here by 7 when he does come." "Did your mate send you a fortune?" "Nah, only some photographs and papers about a place out there in British Columbia." "Would you go there?" "I thought perhaps we might." "Oh, yes. I believe it's lovely." But he was put out by the postman's coming. "Them darn bikes. They're on you before you know where you are." I hope he twigged nothing. After all, what could he twig? "You must get up now and get ready. I'm just going to look round outside." She saw him go reconnoitering into the glade with dog and gun. She went downstairs and washed and was ready by the time he came back, with a few things in the little silk bag. He locked up, and they set off, but through the wood, not down the lane. He was being wary. "Don't you think one lives for time like last night?" she said to him. "Aye, but there's a rest of times to think on," he replied, rather short. They plodded on down the overgrown path, he in front, in silence. "And we will live together and make a life together, won't we?" she pleaded. "Aye," he replied, striding on without looking round. When the time comes, just now, you're off to Venice or somewhere." She followed him dumbly, with sinking heart. Oh, how now she was west to go. At last he stopped. "I'll just strike across here," he said, pointing to the right. But she flung her arms round his neck and clung to him. "But you'll keep the tenderness for me, won't you?" she whispered. "I loved last night, but you'll keep the tenderness for me, won't you?" He kissed her, and held her close for a moment. Then he sighed and kissed her again. I mustn't go and look till the car's coming there. He strode over the low brambles and bracken, leaving a trail through the fern. For a minute or two he was gone. Then he came striding back. Car's not there yet, he said, but there's a baker's cart on the road. He seemed anxious and troubled. Hark! They heard a car softly hoot as it came nearer. It slowed up on the bridge. She plunged with utter mournfulness in his track through the fern and came to a huge holly hedge. He was just behind her. Here, go through there, he said, pointing to a gap. I shan't come out. She looked at him in despair, but he kissed her and made her go. She crept in sheer misery through the holly and through the wooden fence, stumbled down the little ditch and up into the lane, where Hilda was just getting out of the car in vexation. Why are you there? Said Hilda. Where's he? He's not coming. Connie's face was running with tears as she got into the car with her little bag. Hilda snatched up the motoring helmet with the disfiguring goggles. Put it on, she said. And Connie put on the disguise, then the long motoring coat, and she sat down, a goggling, inhuman, unrecognizable creature. Hilda started the car with a business-like motion. She heaved out of the lane and were away down the road. Connie had looked round, but there was no sight of him. Away, away. She sat in bitter tears. The parting had come so suddenly, so unexpectedly. It was like death. Thank goodness you'll be away from him for some time, said Hilda, turning to avoid Crossville village. You see, Hilda, said Connie after lunch, when they were nearing London, you have never known either real tenderness or real sensuality. And if you do know them with the same person, it makes a great difference. For mercy's sake, don't brag about your experiences, said Hilda. I've never met the man yet who was capable of intimacy with a woman, giving himself up to her. That was what I wanted. I'm now keen on their self-satisfied tenderness and their sensuality. I'm not content to be any man's little petsy-wetsy, nor his chair pleaser either. I wanted a complete intimacy, and I didn't get it. That's enough for me. Connie pondered this. Complete intimacy. She supposed that meant revealing everything concerning yourself to the other person, and his revealing everything concerning himself. But that was a bore. And all that weary self-consciousness between a man and a woman, a disease. I think you're too conscious of yourself all the time, with everybody, she said to her sister. I hope at least I haven't a slave nature, said Hilda. But perhaps you have. Perhaps you are a slave to your own idea of yourself. Hilda drove in silence for some time after this piece of unheard-of insolence from that chit Connie. At least I'm not a slave to somebody else's idea of me, and that somebody else a servant of my husband's, she retorted at last in crude anger. You see, that's not so, said Connie calmly. She had always let herself be dominated by her sister. Now, though, somewhere inside her, she was weeping. She was free of the dominion of other women. That in itself was a relief, like being given another life, to be free of the strange dominion and obsession of other women. How awful they were, women. She was glad to be with her father, whose favourite she had always been. She and Hilda stayed in a little hotel off Pall Mall, and Sir Malcolm was in his club. But he took his daughters out in the evening, and they liked going with him. He was still handsome and robust, though just a little afraid of the new world that had sprung up around him. He had got a second wife in Scotland, younger than himself and richer. But he had as many holidays away from her as possible, just as with his first wife. Connie sat next to him at the opera. He was moderately stout and had stout thighs, but they were still strong and well knit, the thighs of a healthy man who had taken his pleasure in life. His good-humoured selfishness, his dogged sort of independence, his unrepenting sensuality. It seemed to Connie she could see them all in his well-knit straight thighs. Just a man. And now becoming an old man, which is sad. Because in his strong, thick male legs there was none of the alert sensitivity and power of tenderness which is the very essence of youth, that which never dies once it is there. Connie woke up to the existence of legs. They became more important to her than faces, which are no longer very real. How few people had lived, alert legs. She looked at the men in the stalls, great puddingly thighs in black pudding cloth, or lean wooden sticks in black funeral stuff, or well-shaped young legs without any meaning, whatever either sensuality or tenderness or sensitiveness, just mere leggy ordinariness that pranced around. Not even any sensuality like her father's. They were all daunted out of existence. But the women were not daunted. The awful mill post of most females. Really shocking. Really enough to justify murder. Or the poor, thin pegs, or the trim, neat things in silk stockings without the slightest look of life. Awful. The millions of meaningless legs prancing meaninglessly around. But she was not happy in London. The people seemed so spectral and blank. They had no alive happiness, no matter how brisk and good-looking they were. It was all barren. And Connie had a woman's blind craving for happiness, to be assured of happiness. In Paris, at any rate, she felt a bit of sensuality still. But what a weary, tired, worn-out sensuality. Worn out for lack of tenderness. Oh, Paris was sad. One of the saddest towns, weary of its now mechanical sensuality, weary of the tension of money, 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 weary even of resentment and conceit, just weary to death, and still not sufficiently Americanized or Londonized to hide the weariness under a mechanical jig. Ah, these manly he-men, these finors, the oglers, these eaters of good dinners. How weary they were, weary, worn out for lack of a little tenderness given and taken. The efficient, sometimes charming women knew a thing or two about the sensual realities. They had that pull over their jiggly English sisters, but they knew even less of tenderness. Dry, with the endless dry tension of will, they too were wearing out. The human world was just getting worn out. Perhaps it would turn fiercely destructive. A sort of anarchy. Clifford and his conservative anarchy. Perhaps it wouldn't be conservative much longer. Perhaps it would develop into a very radical anarchy. Connie found herself shrinking and afraid of the world. Sometimes she was happy for a little while in the boulevards or in the Bois or the Luxembourg Gardens. But already Paris was full of Americans and English, strange Americans in the oddest uniforms and the usual dreary English that are so hopeless abroad. She was glad to drive on. It was suddenly hot weather. So Hilda was going through Switzerland and over the Brenner, then through the Dolomites down to Venice. Hilda loved all the managing and the driving and being mistress of the show. Connie was quite content to keep quiet. and the trip was really quite nice. Only Connie kept saying to herself, why don't I really care? Why am I never really thrilled? How awful that I don't really care about the landscape anymore. But I don't. It's rather awful. I'm like Saint Bernard, who could sail down the lake of Lucerne without ever noticing that there were even mountain and green water. I just don't care for landscape anymore. Why should one stare at it? Why should one? I refuse to. No. She found nothing vital in France or Switzerland or the Tyrol or Italy. She just was carted through it all. And it was all less real than rugby, less real than the awful rugby. She felt she didn't care if she never saw France or Switzerland or Italy again. They'd keep. Rugby was more real. As for people were all alike, with very little difference. They all wanted to get money out of you, or if they were travellers, they wanted to get enjoyment, perforce, like squeezing blood out of a stone. Poor mountains, poor landscape. It all had to be squeezed and squeezed and squeezed again to provide a thrill, to provide enjoyment. What did people mean? What did they mean with their simply determined enjoying of themselves? No, said Connie to herself. I'd rather be at rugby, where I can go about and be still and not stare at anything or do any performing of any sort. This tourist performance of enjoying oneself is too hopelessly humiliating. It's such a failure. She wanted to go back to rugby, even to Clifford, even to poor, crippled Clifford. He wasn't such a fool as this swarming, holidaying lot anyhow. But in her inner consciousness, she was keeping touch with the other man. She mustn't let her connection with him go. Oh, she mustn't let it go, where she was lost utterly in the world of riff-raffy, expensive people and joy hogs. Oh, the joy hogs. Oh, enjoying oneself. Another modern form of sickness. They left the car in mystery in a garage and took the regular steamer over to Venice. It was a lovely summer afternoon. The shallow lagoon ripple, the sun, full sunshine, made Venice, turning its back to them across the water, look dim. At the station quay, they changed to a gondola, giving the man the address. He was a regular gondolier in a white and blue blouse, not very good looking, not at all impressive. Yes, the Villa Esmeralda, yes, I know it. I have been the gondolier for a gentleman there, but a fair distance out. He seemed a rather childish, impetuous fellow. He rode with a certain exaggerated impetuosity through the dark side canals with the horrible slimy green walls, the canals that go through the poorer quarters where the washing hangs high up on ropes, and there is a slight or strong odour of sewage. But at last he came to one of the open canals with pavement on either side and looping bridges that run straight at right angles to the Grand Canal. The two women sat under the little awning. The man was perched above behind them. Are the signorina staying long at the Villa Esmeralda? He asked, rowing easy and wiping his perspiring face with a white and blue handkerchief. Some 20 days. We are both married ladies, said Hilda, in her curious hushed voice that made her Italian sound so foreign. 20 days, said the man. There was a pause, after which he asked, do the signor want a gondola for the 20 days, or so that they will stay at the Villa Esmeralda? Or by the day, or by the week? Connie and Hilda considered. In Venice, it is always preferable to have one's own gondola, as it is preferable to have one's own car on land. What is there at the villa? What boats? There is a motor launch, also a gondola, but the but meant they won't be your property. How much do you charge? It's about 30 shillings a day or £10 a week. Is that the regular price? Asked Hilda. Less, Signora, less the regular price. The sisters considered. Well, said Hilda, come tomorrow morning and we will arrange it. What is your name? His name was Giovanni, and he wanted to know at what time he should come. And then for whom should he say he was waiting? Hilda had no card. Connie gave him one of hers. He glanced at it swiftly with his hot, southern blue eyes, then glanced again. Ah, he said, lighting up. Milady, isn't it? Milady Constanza, said Connie. He nodded repeatedly. Milady Constanza, and putting the card carefully away in his blouse. Join me for the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. Join me for the romance. Yes. Join me for the next video of Lady Chatterley's Lover. I look forward to talking with you and reading for you then. Morel Benard. See you then.